Welcome to the Millionaire Choice Podcast. And today we have on the show Kelly Hollingsworth. And so thank you for coming on the show, Kelly.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited to hear your story about how you succeeded in a male-dominated industry with hedge funds, developing your own hedge fund. And then now you're helping other women build seven-figure incomes. I think that's one of the things that I hear a lot on the shows that I'm on is how do you succeed in this environment? My wife herself is a stay-at-home mom. And so she's going back into the workforce right now, helping me with my business, but just, resetting from this life that you lived into this new kind of era and to find success. So tell us a little bit about your story and where you came from.
Well, I grew up in the mountains of North Idaho. We lived in a little town called Coeur d'Alene, which is kind of famous. It has a beautiful lake, maybe an undiscovered Tahoe. And I was very conscious of the fact that my family had no money, because this kind of place attracts people who do have money. And so they were living these great lives. They had waterfront homes, they had boats, they took their families out all the time. And my family, I was raised by a single mom, and she delivered newspapers to support me and my two sisters. So every morning, 365 days a year, she was up at 3 o'clock in the morning, driving around the dark woods of rural North Idaho in this tiny little Toyota Tercel, delivering the newspapers that paid for our food and our rent. We couldn't afford to heat our house in traditional ways, so we drove that little Toyota Tercel up into the woods, and we gathered wood from the ground of old logging sites. And we'd pile as much of it as we could into the trunk of her car, and we heated our house with that. And we didn't have a television, so I read books from the library all the time. That was kind of a good thing because I got to be a good reader. I learned to love stories. It was a very different kind of life, and our family was close, and we were pretty happy. But I, as I said earlier, was very aware that money makes your life look a lot different. And I had a sense that life would be easier for all of us and safer for my mom if we had some money. So I made it my mission in life to make money. That was my driving force.
Yeah, it's crazy. Growing up in the low income area, you just don't realize, I think a lot of times that life could be different. I think I grew up, it sounds like you grew up in a little bit harder lifestyle than I did, but even then I didn't realize that things were different. Like, why did your power get cut off or your water get cut off, or why were you wearing the non-brand shoes while the other kids were wearing the brand equipment and the brand jackets and things. And it sounds like you woke up a little sooner than I did. So I had my wake up call at like 25. It sounds like you woke up pretty early going, hey, this money thing, I want some of this.
Yes, I started my first business when I was 13 years old. We lived on the poor side of our neighborhood, our house back to the freeway, but I would walk over, there was a golf course, and I would walk to the other side of the golf course where the wealthy people lived, and I started cleaning houses for wealthy people when I was 13 years old. If I needed something for school, clothes, or a dress for the prom or something, I wanted nice things, and I had my little housekeeping business, and that's how I made my money for the nicer things that I wanted.
I think that's amazing. My parents forced me to go to work at age 13. So while you're cleaning houses, I was painting curves and scrubbing concrete and pulling these little prickly bushes out of the weeds around the convenience store that my mom worked at. But I think that's interesting, is like starting to get that work ethic ingrained in you, but you did it voluntarily, right?
Yes, I had friends whose families had, one of my friends owned the Coeur d'Alene Resort, her father did, and one of my friends, her father was the president of a bank. So I knew what life looks like when a teenage girl has money, and I wanted some of the things that they had. I certainly couldn't have all of the things, but I wanted them, and I was willing to work for them.
So can you remember what one of those things were that were on your list?
Oh, yes. I developed a love for high-end handbags as a young teenager because my girlfriends had them. So I had a Gucci purse from my housekeeping business when I was 15 years old. And to this day, I love to spend money on a good handbag. I have a Louis Vuitton handbag, limited edition, that costs more money than my car. so,
So that
I'm
could,
not at all in. What?
I was going to say, so that could be either a very expensive handbag or a very frugal car.
It's both. It's both. I'm not into cars, but I'm really into handbags.
Wow. So that's really awesome. So did you get your work ethic? Did you get that from your mom? Because you said your mom really sounded like she was a real go-getter trying to provide for the family.
Absolutely. There is no task in my family that we are afraid to do. Everybody is a worker. And in some ways, that is actually a detriment to earning money because what I learned getting into the upper echelons of the hedge fund industry is building enormous wealth, generating a very high income requires you to learn to think your way into money rather than work your way into money. It's more about strategic thought processes than it is about brute force. But
Yeah.
working is a terrific way to get started.
Yeah, to keep, and I think that's a wonderful object lesson there. I think for a lot of people, it's learning to go from this mindset of working for money because you have a limited amount of hours, and you can increase your value of those hours, but you can't necessarily multiply your number of hours. You still have a limited number. So even if you max out your value, you still have a limited number to be able to do that. And so you kind of learn to multiply that through your brain and through learning and how to produce money.
I watched it more than I learned it. I was a worker for most of my career. I heard as a college student, someone told me I was working at a nice restaurant in Missoula, Montana to get my way through undergraduate school. And somebody at that restaurant just mentioned, oh, tax attorneys make $900 an hour. And that kind of money was unheard of for me. So I thought, well, I don't know what that is, but if that's what it pays, that's what I'm going to be. And all I had to do was become a CPA and get a law degree. And I thought, fine, I'll do it if that's what you have to do. And with that combination of credentials, I never did become a tax attorney, but I wound up working in the hedge fund industry. And those 2 degrees got me a seat at the table. In rooms full of ultra wealthy men, they would invite me into the meeting because they would say, oh, we need Kelly in the meeting because she understands the legal implications of what we're talking about or the accounting or tax implications of what we were talking about. So that got me in the room. And I don't think I would have been in the room without those credentials. But once I was in the room, what I discovered is that I was actually more of a business advisor than I was a lawyer or an accountant. So I started advising hedge fund managers how to grow their businesses before I think they were even aware that that's what I was doing. I could just see from my experience in running my own businesses that what they were doing in terms of trying to attract investors into their funds wasn't going to work, and I was able to advise them on what would work. And they thought it was legal advice, but it wasn't.
Yeah. So I love how you, and I don't want to miss it because I think it's really important for people to hear that, is that you invested in yourself. And so with your degrees, and so and I don't know, that was consciously, you did it consciously, but it turned around because you made that investment. It opened doors for opportunity for you.
Yes. It was never actually, I don't think, even a choice to make the investment. It was instilled in us from a very early age. The way out is to get an education. The way out is to study something valuable, learn something that other people would pay you to if you knew it. And so it took me a long time to get through undergraduate school. I waitressed and worked through my 4-year college degree. It took 7 years. But it was never a question that I wasn't going to finish. I was going to do it. It was just, you talk about the millionaire choice. And for me, it was actually a mission. There was a single path for my life, and that was the path, and there was no other option.
I really like that. The Millionaire Mission. Maybe that should be my next book. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you were able to turn that. And then if you don't mind me asking, you hit the millionaire mark. When did you hit that?
I wasn't consciously aware of when I hit it. I remember I interviewed John Lee Dumas for my podcast, and he, if you don't know who he is, I'm sure a lot of people do, he runs the podcast Entrepreneur on Fire, and he very famously reports on his income to all his podcast listeners every month, and he is well in the 7-figure earnings mark every year. And I interviewed him for my podcast, and he said, I knew exactly the moment that I became a millionaire because it was all the money was in one account. And for me, it wasn't that way. You know, I had property, I had investments in hedge funds, I had brokerage accounts, I had bank accounts, and I didn't really pay attention to what my net worth was. My focus was more on the process of earning rather than the accumulation of the money. And so at one point I had sat down, I think it was around December, it was a year end, and it seemed like a good time to, you know, I am an accountant, it seemed like a good time to take stock of my assets. What does my balance sheet look like? And I was well above the 7-figure mark. And it was like, oh, well, I guess that's what happens. It's a little bit like exercising and working out and going to the gym and eating well. If you just do those behaviors, pretty soon you're going to look up and think, oh, well, wow, I fit into my skinny jeans. They slide right on. And I didn't even know that that was going to happen. But look, here I am in my closet and they fit. And it was that kind of experience for me.
So were those skinny millionaire jeans?
I don't spend money on jeans. I do spend money on purses, but not jeans.
Yeah. So I think that's really a key point there, is because a lot of people believe there's some mystique to building wealth or mystique to becoming a millionaire. And what you just explained really succinctly and just kind of very smoothly, by the way, is you were intentional, and there was a process to it, and you paid attention to the process and didn't really like count the dollars or where it was, going. It was just like, this is how you manage money. This is how you do it. And wealth is just building and accumulating. And, oh, by the way, I just crossed that mark sometime in the last little bit. And surprise, that's fun. So what kind of difficulties or challenges did you kind of face? I mean, obviously you had to break free from that impoverished lifestyle growing up, and you made that decision pretty early. But what were some of the challenges you faced along the way?
Well, I think one of them was, I totally forgot about this until you were just talking about making the decision and making a mission. For some reason, this memory came up. When I first started out, my approach was grounded in frugality. I read books like Amy Decision's Tightwad Gazette. That was a big deal at the time I was in college. I read the book by Your Money or Your Life, Robin, what's her name? Joe and Vicky Dominguez, something like that. Your Money or Your Life is the title of the book. And I think that I was ultra focused on the not spending side of wealth building in my early years, because that's all I really knew. I knew that I had 100% control over the money that left my wallet and went into someone else's. So I was ultra frugal. I invented foods like bean burgers that I made with onions and kidney beans that I'd mash up and cook, and I'd pretend that was a hamburger. The level of my frugality was really astounding. I waitressed to get through undergraduate school, and I finished school with no student loans, $5,000 cash in the bank, and a paid-for brand new Toyota Celica. That was kind of a big deal sports car back then. So I was very, very good at saving a lot of money and living this ultra frugal lifestyle. But one of the challenges in an ultra frugal lifestyle is that it is constantly a lifestyle of limitation. We have this much money. How are we going to make it stretch? And things that felt expansive, like being invited to go away for a weekend or being invited to go to a brunch with friends, didn't fit into that. So it was very much a life of limitation and scarcity and fear. And that was how I initially succeeded. And I think it was necessary for me to go through that period, because when you have a limited amount of income and you're working on your education, that is really one of the things that you can control very well. So it's important to learn that skill. But I think for many people who are on a wealth building journey, they get stuck in that skill. And what was so fascinating to me when I left the Northwest, I grew up in North Idaho. I went to school in Missoula, Montana, and I got my first job in Chicago. So I'm working downtown Chicago with people who trade futures contracts for a living, some of the wealthiest people in the world if they're good at this trading. And what I learned there is frugality has its place, but it is simply a tool on a wealth building journey. And this was the most astounding thing to me. You actually have 100% control, not just over the money you spend, but also over the money that you bring into your life. And I know that that is a giant leap for most people to accept, but it is an important faith-based journey that people need to go on if they want to live a life of wealth building that isn't grounded in budgets and scarcity and lack, but that is in fact informed or placed on a foundation of abundance. I can truly create any amount of money that I decide to create. And once you know that, suddenly the need for budgets and frugality falls away. I still am a frugal person. My car is 17 years old, I think, and that's just because it's who I am now. There's no need to spend money on things that I don't really find a lot of value in. And so you can never get rich if you're constantly spending more than what you make. But I think a huge lesson for me was frugality is not the be all end all. It's recognizing that you can create as much money as you want to create. And as long as you don't have a desire to spend more than that, you will be wealthy in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I think a lot of people get stuck. And again, it's one of those excuses that they make. The rich people got lucky, or I'll never be rich, and it's because they're not thinking that way. They haven't changed their mindset. And I would say my story followed yours quite. I was interested to say that it followed yours quite paralleled early on, because I didn't know, coming up in a low income family, I didn't know that $100,000 income was. I didn't even know what that was. Like, the idea of making that was just so foreign to me. I was just happy to be making more money than my mom was making. And
right.
I thought I was doing pretty well. Mom's been at it for 20 years and I'm making more money than she is. I'm doing pretty well. And once she found that out, I had to start paying rent before I moved out. And and so she got a little bit back from me. So did you have any mentors or anything that kind of helped you as you were going through this journey? People that kind of gave you their wisdom and shared it with you?
I can recall a few very kind, very wealthy people giving me a little nudge back onto the path when I had gone astray. But for the most part, my mentors were writers. And I really want to stress this. If you are in a community or a place or a family where you're not surrounded by people who understand how easy it is to make money, you can be around those people through books. And I've read every book I think there is on wealth building and money, and also a lot of fiction. And so you can learn so much from the books. I can recommend a few if you like at the end of the episode. But I also think it's important to follow your fascination. Whatever fascinates you is a sign that that is your road, your particular path to wealth. And I'll tell a story that that makes that example more concrete. I realize it's a little bit intangible. So I went to work in the hedge fund industry. I was working with the wealthiest men on the planet. It's all men in that business. And I was working with them, and that was my job by day. But as I said earlier, I was reading books as a child because we didn't have a television all the time. So I was fascinated with storytelling. So for a couple decades, I was living this parallel careers. I had my hedge fund industry job by day. I had my storytelling fascination by night. And I studied everything I could on storytelling, how to write a screenplay, how to craft a best-selling novel, how to shape a story so that it resonates with listeners and inspires them. And suddenly, these two seemingly unrelated fascinations began to intertwine. And I would look at the marketing materials that my hedge fund manager clients drafted, and they would come to me, they wanted legal review. And I would say, this isn't going to inspire anyone to invest into your hedge fund because there's no story here. And most of them didn't want to hear it. The egos were huge, as I'm sure you can imagine, but some of them did want to hear it. And they were like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And they would let me take their marketing materials and insert a little bit of story into the materials. So instead of talking about the algorithm that they were using to make millions of dollars, they started talking about the happy ending that their algorithm created. And that little bit of insertion of story into their materials made the materials so much more resonant, and people began investing based on them. And so that's where I got a sense, wow, this storytelling thing really works to inspire people to do business with you. Commercial storytelling has a giant value. And so then I saw an opportunity in the market, and I saw nobody else is capitalizing on this. I can build my own hedge fund around this. I can put my money into it and the money of other investors, and it will be a successful hedge fund. We'll all make a lot of money based on this opportunity. And people told me, you can't do that. It's a very challenging environment to raise money in. No one's going to want to buy into a fund like that. But for the first time in my career, I had unfettered discretion to use as much storytelling in my investor attraction efforts as I could. And so I thought, I'm going to try it. And within 12 months, I had taken this storytelling fascination that I thought was never going to go anywhere, and I had used it in my launch of my own hedge fund. And within 12 months, I had raised $150 million, and my fund was close to new investment. And that's how I became one of the few women in the world to manage her own hedge fund. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't just pursued this fascination with storytelling for decades, having no idea why I was doing it. I just knew I was fascinated with it. And so I kept going with it. And eventually, the purpose, the wealth building purpose of that revealed itself to me. It was really amazing experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I think just especially in the male dominated society, I just can't imagine the difficulty it would be to get there. And I would love to have seen the looks on those guys' faces a year later after you got going and got started. That might've been something fun to look at too. So so let's turn the corner a little bit here. We're talking with Kelly Hollingsworth about how to help women, create seven-figure incomes. And so let's turn the corner and talk about that a little bit. Like, you've got this passion to step in and help women, in all walks of life. You always hear that, women are underpaid and all these kinds of things. How does that fit in, like, with what you're trying to do, changing this mindset of maybe the clients or the people that are seeking you out, and the people you're trying to help, to get them to really kind of turn everything upside down? You sound like a real cultural, like you're directly going against the culture that's out there. and where people's heads are. So talk to us about that.
Well, I think most big pivots are born from adversity, and that pivot from working with, really rich men, helping them get even richer, to working with women was exactly the same thing for me. It arose from, I was injured hiking the Pacific Crest Trail with my husband. We were on a 22-mile hike one day, and by mile 20, I thought I was going to have to be helicoptered out of there. I was in so much pain. And for almost 4 years after that, I couldn't sit, stand, or walk. And I was basically lying on a floor in my living room, talking with 20 or 30 rich hedge fund managers scattered around the globe. And I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't even walk through a grocery store. I couldn't sit in a car long enough to get to a grocery store. So I wasn't a quadriplegic or anything like that, but I was suddenly aware of how isolated I was. I lived in Idaho. I had wealthy clients all over the world: Zurich, London, New York, Paris, Sydney. And I never really interacted with women or engaged with them. And suddenly I realized how hungry I was for female companionship and how much I wanted to engage with women and have more of a life than just working with 20 or 30 men scattered around the world. And I swore that if I ever got up off the floor and I could walk or move around again, I was going to do something meaningful beyond just making money. And that's when I really decided, I'm working with women now. I believe, based on my experiences, that any woman on the planet who wants one can generate a 7-figure income. And she can do so with less work than it takes to earn a $40,000 income. One of the reasons that women's incomes tend to flatten is because they think, wow, it is really difficult to earn the money that I'm already making. It's going to be that much more difficult to make even a lot more money. And what I want everyone to know, is it's difficult to earn a little bit of money, and it's very easy to earn a lot of money.
Say that again.
It's very difficult to earn a little bit of money, and it is very easy to earn a lot of money.
I think I could probably just take that one line that you just created and just play that over and over for 45 minutes for the listeners, because I mean, there's so much richness in that, that story, or that, that goal that you have. And I think we are so guilty of being stuck exactly with this mindset. For me, it was the hourly mindset. I was making $3.25 an hour pulling weeds out of the curb. I'm like, man, if I could just make another $1 an hour, my whole life's going to change as a teenager. And it didn't change. And then I got to $10 and $15 an hour, and my life still didn't change. But we keep trying to, strive forward for these nickels and these dimes, per hour, or dollars per hour, not realizing that there's all this other opportunity and that that's available for us. It's not something that's off limits to us. We can get there and we can do it. We just have to start by changing our mindset, and then, put the tools in place to get there. For you, it was the education first. And I too got to college. I was the first one in my family to get through and finish college as an engineer, and I'm not doing that now. And got out of it. Oddly enough, very interestingly, I got out of the education that I had studied for as a mechanical engineer. I only spent about 6 years doing that. And then for the last 20 years, I've been doing something else. And so I'm not even using the core of what my degree was, but yet it was still valuable. It was a good investment, but it just took me into places that I couldn't really predict. So when you're talking to these ladies and getting them to see that, what are some of the struggles you're facing with that you're having to help them kind of bridge that gap and jump into that new world?
Well, one thing that was fascinating to me, I became a coach before I even knew what a coach was. I didn't even know coaching was a thing, but I was learning so much about the mindset of making millions of dollars for my hedge fund manager clients. The Bible of that industry is Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. So I was learning so much from being in their proximity, and I began coaching under-earning women who were in that industry. They were the lawyers, the accountants, the receptionists. And the first woman I ever coached was a lawyer with Ivy League credentials. She went to a top 3 law school. She went to Yale for her undergrad. And she was making $60,000 a year, which sounds like a nice salary. But that's what the hedge fund was paying to its receptionist. And she was the lawyer. So within a few weeks of coaching with her, she was making $240,000 a year. She had quadrupled her income. And this happened over and over and over throughout the course of my hedge fund career. I would work with women on the mindset of making more money and the messaging that is necessary to make more money. And they would triple or quadruple their incomes. And what I discovered is that there are 4 uniquely female fears around making money that high-earning men do not have. And I'll give you an example. One of them is the fear of harm from earning more money. I have never heard a high-earning man say, I'm afraid of making more money because it's going to be bad for my family. It's going to be bad for my children. But women routinely say, my family comes first. And implicit in that statement, when we say something comes first, that necessarily means something else comes second. And what comes second for them is making money. I think one of the reasons that I was so able to become a high-earning woman with ease is because it was front and center in my mind. I am doing this for my family. This isn't harming anyone. This is good for everyone in my family. And with that thought front and center, my pursuit of a high income was not weighed down. And so one of the uniquely female fears is that women need to get past if they want to become high earners, is it something you do for your family, not in spite of your family. Because if it's a choice between taking care of your kids or taking care of your cash, you're going to choose your kids every time. And what my message to women is, you choose both every single day. It's rare that the world would present you with a Hobson's choice where you have to choose one or the other. So you just choose both and you take care of everybody with the cash as well as with your care of them.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And you mentioned triple and quadruple women's income. So I can tell by talking to you, I can see it in your face too, is you're going to walk into a room with a bunch of women and you're going to walk in there with the mindset that every single woman in that room could increase their income 3 to 4x. And your heart is to help them do that, but there's nobody in that room that can't do that. All of them can do it.
They all can do it. The other interesting thing about women relative to men, I saw this in my work as a hedge fund lawyer. I'll start over. In the hedge fund industry, if you want to be a hedge fund manager, you necessarily need to know how to trade a financial instrument in a way that generates profits. Being a good trader of financial instruments, either stocks or derivatives, is a necessary skill to hedge fund management. And yet, I can't tell you how many times a man would call me out of the blue and say, yeah, I'm ready to start a hedge fund. How much are your legal fees to set this up? And I would say, well, have you traded anything before? What do you trade? How has that gone? Did you make money for yourself? Did you make money for somebody else? Oh, no, I don't know how to do that. And I'm thinking, oh, wow. And I thought it was a phenomenon that was unique to the hedge fund industry. Just the egos must be so huge, you don't even need to know what you're doing to start a hedge fund. But then I read a statistic from one of the online recruiters, I think it was ZipRecruiter. They did a study that men will apply for a job when they know 65 to 70% of what it takes to get that job. They don't have nearly all of the credentials, but they'll apply for the job. And their thought, which is a highly effective thought, is, I'm just going to get in there. I'm going to figure it out as I go. And women have the opposite thought. For women, the thought is, I better know 125% of everything I could possibly ever need to know to do this. And if I'm not there yet, it's not right for me to take the job. And why do they have this fear of not knowing everything they could possibly need to know? This is another one of the uniquely female fears that holds down female earnings. I call it the fear of confrontation. In modern times, we don't have to look very far to see how women fared in confrontations since the dawn of time. Here in the United States and in other developed nations, as women, we can stand up and say, I think this, or I want that, without open hostility. But in some countries, even today, that kind of thing is met with swift and harsh punishment or even death. And that has been going on since the dawn of time for the female human. And I think it is woven into our DNA to fear confrontation. As I was proceeding through my career and earning ever increasing amounts of money and making more empowered decisions all the time. For example, starting your own hedge fund is a very empowered decision. When I did that, people were like, you're doing what? And I remember talking to one man and he said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a hedge fund manager. And he said, oh, whose fund do you manage? And I said, well, mine. And he said, no, I mean, whose fund is it? It's not just Kelly Hollingsworth's hedge fund. And I said, well, actually, yes, it is. As I was doing these things, my mother and my grandmother would say to me, what does your husband think about that? And they feared his reaction as I was making decisions to increase my income. And that was fascinating to me because the fear was not grounded in reality. It had to come from someplace else. And one day I read about a study. A male researcher, exposed some rodents, mice or rats, to electric shocks. At the same time, he exposed them to the fragrance of cherry blossoms. And then later, when he stopped shocking them, when they got the whiff of that cherry blossom scent, their anxiety would go through the roof. And that was very understandable for them because they would associate the smell with the pain. And even when the pain wasn't there, the smell was still frightening. But what was fascinating about that study is that their offspring experienced the same anxiety when they smelled the cherry blossom scent. So it was woven into their DNA to be afraid of situations that caused pain. And I think it was woven into the DNA of my mother and my grandmother to be afraid for me when I was doing things that seemed scary, that risked confrontation, that could bring me swift punishment or maybe even death. They were terrified for me. And so all of these uniquely female fears are important to recognize because they exist, but the great news is they can be deconstructed. And when they're deconstructed, it's like taking apart a garage that you don't want on your property anymore. You tear it down, you haul the pieces away, and then your earnings life is just a clear path. You're past them and you don't have to be afraid anymore. That's another message I really want women to hear.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's just amazing to hear you like summarize it all that way. And I can just see that play out just in, with my wife right now. Our kids are ages 19 down to 8. Sorry, should beat me for getting the ages wrong there. But her just kind of going, okay, my kids are growing up. What's next in my life? Because her life was wrapped up in the children, but she's got a lot of her own wants and stuff, but she set those aside to help us, 6 kids is a lot of work. And, but I can still, the conversations we have are just so fascinating to me, and they mirror what you're talking about. Not even talking about money, but just about risk and, like putting yourself out there. And for me, I'm just a go for it kind of guy, walk into a room and I really haven't thought much about it. It's just how I'm wired, but trying to draw that parallel between how I process things and how my wife processes, and helping her to step out, encouraging her to step out. What you say makes a lot of sense to me. It helps me understand that. And, but yeah, that is fascinating. So as you're working with these women and getting them through there, what are some of the big high level points that you're drilling down into them? Like, what would you say if you sat down with the women right now, like she walked through your door and you got a coaching session, what would be some of the things you would hit her with?
Well, the first thing that I usually offer to women is a little exercise where we go through a series of questions about their expectation for what they're going to earn. And I ask them, what's a realistic number for you to earn in your business this year, or in your new venture, or in the job you're seeking, whatever it is you're setting out to do for the next 12 months. And the number is very, very low. And then I say, well, okay, that feels realistic. What is a number that would delight you to earn in your business? And they look at me like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And then I say, the third question in the exercise, and this is just at the beginning, the third question is, if I were to say, I'm delighted that you're here at the seminar we're having today, and thank you for showing up, and I'm so happy you're here, I'm going to write you a check, and it's going to be $100,000. How does that feel? Does that feel delightful? And they are delighted. And so I say, how about $500,000? And they're even more delighted. And the delight gets bigger as the number increases. So the exercise, and we go on to go through a number of questions designed to help them see how these uniquely female fears are limiting the number for them. But the first three questions in the exercise reveal something very important. They want money. They would be delighted to receive it if the universe just handed it to them in the form of me giving them a check. But the thought of earning the money, of making the money, of requesting the money is terrifying to them. So they have a very low number that's realistic. They can't even think about being delighted by the amount that they're earning because of a third uniquely female fear that I haven't mentioned yet, which is reluctance to receive. If it's sprinkled on me through fairy dust and it just falls out of the sky, I'm happy to take it, but I don't want anyone to think that I actually might want money. And this presents with women in the fear of showing up in social media, in showing up, they're very, very comfortable advocating for a friend's business. My friend is an amazing baker or CPA or coach. You need to hire her. They love to advocate for their women friends. But when it comes to advocating for themselves, they're very uncomfortable because it is scary for them to have other people think that they might want money. And that's another of the uniquely female fears that we deconstruct in the coaching work we do together. So I'd like for every woman to know, get clear on the fact that you actually want some money. Money solves so many problems in life, I can't even tell you. There are very few problems that money can't solve. And if money can't solve it, it certainly makes it go down easier. And the second thing I want to tell women is there is inside every woman a seven-figure business. And it looks different for every woman because every woman is different. I couldn't have predicted a successful way for me to become a self-made multimillionaire is storytelling combined with law, accounting, and hedge funds. I couldn't have predicted that, but that's the way it worked. And the reason every woman is qualified to become a seven-figure earner is because women are born to serve. We love to serve people, and we do not show up until we know everything we need to know to serve at the highest level. Women will have PhD level expertise, and they will go to the ends of the earth to constantly sharpen their expertise so that they don't make mistakes, so that they serve at the highest level. And that is a skill that once they rid themselves of the uniquely female fears and they make the decision as you say, the millionaire choice, I'm going to do this, they can totally do it. So what I'd like to offer to any of your female listeners who want to take advantage of this resource is I'm happy to spend an hour or 90 minutes with any woman who wants to talk to me about her path, her skills, her credentials, and I can help lots of women right off the bat see a path that they didn't see for themselves. I think through my study of story, I've gotten pretty good at integrating the different parts of somebody's experiences, background, interests, fascinations into a cohesive story that leads them to a happy ending of earning millions of dollars.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Kelly. I really thank you for sharing all that with us. So how would people go about finding out more about you and getting in touch with you?
You can go to my website. It's kellyhollingsworth.com. That's Kelly with a Y. Hollingsworth is HOLLINGSWORTH. Sorry, that's so long. kellyhollingsworth.com. And there's a link there where they can access my calendar and set up a time to speak with me. Or they can just email me, kelly@kellyhollingsworth.com, if they can't find a time on my calendar that works for them. My new mission in life is to help 1,000 women become seven-figure earners. And so I'm happy to talk to any woman who wants to talk about her path, her goals. I'm talking to as many women as I can. I can't work with all of them as a one-on-one coach, but it's a resource that I'd like every woman to avail herself of if she wants to talk to me.
Yeah, I think a lot of women should. I hope everybody that's listening will take advantage of that. I'm going to email your information over to my sister, I think, when we get off this call. So,
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. And I hope you have just a wonderful, wonderful week and just help millions and millions of women get on track with their finances and their lives and start these businesses up.
The Millionaire Choice Show shares the opinions and experiences of people and should not be considered financial advice. Before making your own financial choices, please seek out a registered financial advisor or certified financial planner.